This video will focus on sentence fragments, a common grammatical error and one that can make a writer look particularly bad as it presents an incomplete thought or idea and can be confusing. If you have sentence fragments in your writing, this is something that you want to address immediately. The information in this video will also help you avoid these types of errors if you just follow a few simple steps, which we'll look at in just a moment. Here's a basic definition of what a sentence fragment is. A sentence fragment is an incomplete sentence that is written as if it were a complete sentence. Often a sentence fragment is missing an important part of a sentence, such as a subject or a verb. We're going to start by looking at a series of steps you can go through to identify sentence fragments in your writing. Once you've identified sentence fragments, correcting them is fairly simple. So if you're aware that you have sentence fragments in your writing, first examine every sentence you write and ask yourself these questions. Does the sentence have a verb? If the sentence does have a verb, circle it. Also, if the sentence has more than one verb, go ahead and circle all the verbs. Next, ask yourself, does the sentence have a subject? If it does, underline it. Remember that the subject is always a noun or a pronoun, a person, place, or thing, that tells who or what is doing the action of the verb. If you need a review of subjects and verbs, I cover those topics in a separate video. In the third and final step you ask, does the sentence have a subordinating conjunction, a word like because or since? If so, draw a box around it. We'll talk more about subordinating conjunctions later in the video. For now, just know that if you don't have something circled and underlined, you have a sentence fragment. This is a really easy way to figure out if you've got sentence fragments in your writing. As we said earlier, once you know you have a sentence fragment, it's pretty easy to correct the error. We'll spend a little time here going through what to do specifically if your sentence is missing a subject or a verb, and we'll finish up by looking at subordinating conjunctions and how they can create sentence fragments. Here's an example of a sentence that's missing a subject. Really wanted a good grade and studied for hours. If we follow the steps we reviewed a few moments ago, which are listed at the bottom of the screen, we can easily see how to correct the sentence. Starting with the first step, we can see that this sentence has two verbs, wanted and studied. Going to step 2, we see that we don't have a person in this sentence who did the wanting or the studying, so this sentence does not have a subject, making it a sentence fragment. So we need to add a subject to the sentence. To make the sentence correct, let's insert the name Kim as our subject. Now we have a person in the sentence who is doing the action of each of these verbs, wanting and studying, making the sentence correct. Now let's look at a second sentence that's missing a subject. We shopped all day at the mall, looking for the perfect suitcase. These two sentences show how lots of sentence fragments occur. They're two sentences with the same subject, but the subject is only written in the first sentence, and not the second one, making the second sentence a sentence fragment. Returning to our steps to identify sentence fragments, if we look for and circle our verb, we see that there are two verbs here, shopped and looking. Moving on to our second step, we see that the first sentence has a subject, we, which tells who did the shopping. But the second sentence does not have a subject, which tells who did the looking, making the second sentence a sentence fragment. To correct the sentence, we can simply add the subject we to the second sentence, making it correct. Now that we've looked at examples of sentence fragments that are missing a subject, we'll take a look at some sentence fragments that are missing a verb. Here's an example of a sentence that's missing a verb, John running down the road in the rain. Returning to the steps we used to determine if the sentence is a fragment, we see that this sentence has a verb, running. The subject, the one doing the running, is John. So this sentence does have a subject and a verb, but it's still a sentence fragment because the verb running ends in ing, but the sentence doesn't have a form of the verb to be, like is, are, was, or were, before the ing form. So we have to add a form of to be before the ing verb. Since it seems like the sentence is talking about something that happened in the past, the form of to be that makes the most sense is was, making the sentence correct. Here's another example of a sentence fragment that's missing a verb. Because of all the interesting people and the final outcome, our shopping trip was a complete success. Returning to our steps, we can identify one verb in this sentence, was, and a subject for that verb, trip, which tells what was a success. Notice that in the first sentence we don't have a verb, which means we also don't have a subject, so the first sentence is a fragment. Looking at these two sentences, the first one seems to be explaining the second one, telling the reason why the shopping trip was a success. So the best correction is probably to connect the two sentences together by changing the period in the first sentence to a comma, making the sentence now correct. The last thing we'll look at is how the use of subordinating conjunctions can create sentence fragments. Subordinating conjunctions are words such as because, if, and since that can be used to link complete sentences. There are many subordinating conjunctions, These are just some examples. But with the exception of very formal writing, the most commonly used subordinating conjunctions are because, if, since, although, after, and so that. Many of us use lots of subordinating conjunctions in our writing naturally, so it's important to know the grammatical rules that are associated with them. If you know and can apply the following 6 points, you should be able to write sentences that contain subordinating conjunctions correctly. Subordinating conjunctions such as because, if, and since can be used to link complete sentences. The subordinating conjunction is attached to one of the two sentences. Using a subordinating conjunction to join two sentences turns one of them into a dependent clause. A dependent clause cannot stand alone and must be attached to a complete sentence, and this is important to notice because this is where sentence fragments come from when you're using subordinating conjunctions. A dependent clause can come before or after a complete sentence. If the dependent clause comes first, place a comma after it. If the dependent clause comes second, no comma is used. Here's an example of a sentence fragment that results from the use of a subordinating conjunction. Thrift stores, yard sales, and flea markets are popular places to shop because they sell items that aren't available anywhere else. If we quickly move through our steps, we see that there are two verbs here, are and sell. In this sentence, the verb are has 3 subjects. 3 different places are popular places to shop, so the subjects for are include thrift stores, yard sales, and flea markets. The subject for sell is they, and in this sentence, we're going to apply our third and final step in our process for identifying sentence fragments because we do have a subordinating conjunction in this sentence. Because, remember, a subordinating conjunction is often followed by a subject and a verb, and if it is, the purpose of the subordinating conjunction is to link the two sentences by making one of them a dependent clause. Remember, a dependent clause by itself is not a complete sentence. It has to be connected to another sentence. If a dependent clause is written by itself as a complete sentence, which is true in this case because there's a period here, it forms a sentence fragment. The way to correct this sentence fragment is to delete the period between the two sentences, linking the two sentences together with a subordinating conjunction and making the new sentence correct. Here's one final example of a sentence fragment that's created because of a subordinating conjunction. Since most thrift stores help charities, they are there to assist people in need. In this sentence, we have 2 verbs, help and are. The subject for help is stores, and the subject for are is they. The subordinating conjunction in this sentence is since, making this first sentence, since most thrift stores help charities, a dependent clause, and in this case a sentence fragment because there's a period after it. It is not linked to another sentence. To correct it, we simply link it to the second sentence by placing a comma between the two sentences, making it correct. This concludes this video on sentence fragments. If you're viewing this as part of a module in Canvas, click on Take the Quiz below the video to get some extra practice. If you're having trouble with the quiz items, make sure to watch the video again. If you still have trouble, contact me to get some extra help.